Every now and then, the strengths and the weaknesses of the community that we work in are exposed to the world. Well, I say the world, our little piece of it. Freenode has shown yet again how the FOSS community will react to what's seen as a threat. I'm not going to go on about the Freenode drama, it's been covered exhaustively elsewhere, but it gave me an opportunity to think about community in general. While some people are always a bit nervous about splitting communities, sometimes community splits do need to happen. Now, why do they need to happen? Well, there can be many reasons for those splits to happen. Sometimes it's a bad actor that's coming in and trying to capture a community. Sometimes there's a huge misunderstanding. Sometimes it's just a series of bad behaviours, and you've got to decide how much you want the health of the community, how much you want it to survive. Now, with Freenode, it's not the first time that the IRC communities had to split. IRC isn't the only chat application in the game now. And we also see elsewhere in FOSS, we see historical forks, if you will, like OpenOffice and LibreOffice, which happened for various reasons, including organisation capture. You have things like the Debian and Devian split, where that came fundamentally down to the idea of differences in how the distribution should be working within a system, or if they should be. And then, of course, you've got when open source applications decide to go fully proprietary and retire a community application, like Sugar CRM and its variants, and you've got things like OwnCloud and Nextcloud. So there are sometimes very good reasons to split the community. Where the difficulty comes in is how acrimonious is that split. Will they work together in the future, or is it so fundamentally damaged that they'll be working against one another? And these are questions we always have to ask ourselves. And of course, occasionally you have a thing where a community feels it has no choice to leave a platform because that platform no longer services that community. In fact, it actively damages that community and can contribute to that community's collapse if nothing is done about it. And we saw this in the past with journaling platforms like Livejournal, when they were heavily pressured by kind of far-right churchgoers who very much wanted to cut down on porn postings and things like that. So you ended up with a lot of accounts being kind of suspended and struck through because of that, and that caused a creation of other communities. The community stepped up in that case, and Dreamwave came out of the same code that Livejournal was built out of, because that was open source, and the community moved over to Dreamwave. You also had things like the Organisation for Transformative Works for fan fiction to live in, and these communities are still around. Now, in the case of Freenode, it's complex and yet fairly simple at the same time. There's a very murky situation with Freenode Limited and who owns the Freenode domain. But at the same time, Freenode relied on a lot of donated infrastructure. And that donated infrastructure came from the community. The reason why Freenode had those servers and the staff in the first place is because that time and the infrastructure was donated. But what we have to consider is that the community will write around threats like that, threats of control, threats of coercion. And we should. We need to be able to work in the open, we need to be able to communicate with our own communities. And we also have to write around people who would restrict that. We have to write around those people who may stop us recruiting new people, being more welcome into those communities. And we've got a lot of work to do in that. We've got to do a lot more open governance. We've got to help people join, make it easier for them. We also have to accept sometimes that the community is going to split, and there can be really good reasons for that, as I said earlier, and you have to consider the psychological aspects. Sometimes people just can't work together. Sometimes there's something that's fundamentally different about how they see a project should be governed, how they see that that governance should work. It's how the split between free software and the open source movement was created in the first place, was that fundamental disagreement about what the four freedoms mean and what they should be and how that should be in terms of licensing. So this doesn't mean that the community is hamstrung, it doesn't mean it's split, it means that there's people looking to recruit more people who think like them and be more welcoming to other outside points of view from the norm, and I think that's a good thing. You can't expect communities to survive if you don't bring in new blood, and it's not enough to be technologically superior, it's not enough to be morally superior. You have to be welcoming. You have to kind of step down from that step slightly. Conversely, if you're a leader in a movement, you kind of have to restrict yourself in what you see and how you interact with people, because you're a figurehead. Much like the Queen in the UK, you don't get to say that much because you have a huge amount of power and influence. If that community chooses to leave and form their own thing, you have to consider how you can work with them in the future. But one thing you definitely don't do is what Freenode did, which was gave the FOSS community no choice but to move with the staff that we'd worked with for years. You gave the community no choice. You became perceived as a bad actor and actively harmful and restricted. So the community had no choice but to move.